carving your statue. Withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not find yourself beautiful yet, act as does the creator of a statue that is still to be made beautiful. He cuts away here, he smooths there, he makes this line lighter, this other purer, until a lovely face has grown upon his work. So do you also cut away all that is excessive, strengthen all that is crooked, bring light to all that is overcast, labor to make all one glow of beauty, and never cease, chiseling your statue until there shall shine out on you from it like the godlike or goddess-like splendor of virtue. Plantinus.
So that carving your statue, if we were all to be able to do that, I imagine we would just bring about a rebirth of humanity, which is in fact our topic for today's Gems from the Wisdom Circle discussion. And to give us a little starting idea and inspiration for our conversation, we have with us Joe Miller. Joe Miller is a longtime student of Theosophy. He also is someone who absolutely loves Walt Whitman. And this I know because I have seen him on a couple occasions do a one-man enactment of Whitman's life and poetry. I know he's got that right at the tip of his tongue probably, or at least parts of it. And although that was a while ago, Joe, I'm going to give you that out. And I think he's going to speak from other aspects of the poetic tradition on this idea of the rebirth of humanity. Joe Miller?
Good afternoon and evening. I think I'm partly amused of thinking about the unqualified poetic tradition, the poetic tradition speaking to the rebirth of humanity. Of course, you know, the institution of poetry is vast and varied and ancient. There isn't really any one poetic tradition, to my mind. The best I can do is point to really just a few passages from a few poems that seem to point to this theme of the rebirth of humanity. The whole notion of a rebirth of humanity is spoken to by various poets. The dawning of something entirely new, the refresh or reboot, renewal of attitude and manner and vision and purpose. All of that would be involved, I think, in what I would picture as the rebirth of humanity. Every birth is in fact a rebirth. Even the birth of a child is really a transition between two realms, isn't it? And I think of, that's how I think of rebirth, as going through a period of constriction. And on the other side, a constriction that often feels like death. And on the other side of that constriction is a new round of life, a new life with new abilities in a new realm. And so I think every constriction, every limitation, every seeming death, viewed from the standpoint of the continuity of the thread of life, is really just a prelude to something greater. And it's a necessary purging, a necessary crippling of what is no longer useful. And of course, the great metaphor, which is used so often, but I never cease to have wonder at it, is the transformations we see in the insect kingdom, especially in the moths and the butterflies, that you can have some ground-dwelling, you know, leaf-chomping worm suddenly enclose, you know, at the right time, enclose itself in what looks like a sarcophagus. I've got an airplane going overhead. I'm near an airport. and go into this state that looks like death. No activity is seen from the outside. There's not even an air hole. And then there's this emergence of an entirely different creature, a creature that no longer walks on the ground, but flies in the air, no longer indifferently chomps leaves, but sips nectar from flowers. So I think when the poets are often pointing to these new abilities, a new horizon for human beings. So I wanted to just look at a few passages with you. Renee, how long should this part take?
Oh, about 20 minutes,
Okay.
15, 20 minutes.
Okay. Look at a few passages from three romantic poets. So two English poets, Percy Bysshe Shelley and William Wordsworth, and then the American poet Whitman, Walt Whitman, who is kind of in that romantic vein as well. In fact, all three of them were alive at the same time for a period of 3 years, I think. Shelley died in 1822 and Whitman was born in 1819. So they existed, kind of overlapping a little at least. The romantic poets were reacting to views of life that were overly mechanized, overly Newtonian, if you will, views that were stripping life of wonder and life itself, believing that if only we could understand the moving of all the atoms, if only we could understand all the moving pieces, we could know what life is. And the romantic poets were akin to the mystic side of life, recognizing there's a kind of wonderment, there's a mystery to consciousness, there's a great universal benevolence, a great sense of belonging that can never be reduced to that kind of mechanization. So you do find in the romantic poets a reaction to that, and their view of rebirth is connected with that. So let's look at a passage, and I'm going to share screen here, and I think I'm going to start with this one. Percy Bysshe Shelley has a poem appropriate to this time of year, although I don't know if in Hawaii you have a sense of it, but it's called Autumn. And it's when in some parts of the world, it's when things die and they're no longer green. So he's using, in this poem, and I just have a few passages from it, I've taken some out, but he is he's intoning. Well, I should just say all these poets, the part of the notion of the poet is the prophet. Is the poet lends his voice to the spirit of the age, and enunciated through the poet is the advent of the changes to come. So it's not only predicting what's to come, but in some ways, through the receptive listeners, it acts as an incentive to bring about that birth. So you'll notice they're all talking about how they are invoking something larger than themselves to point to this vision of the future. And Shelley here is using the occasion of an autumn storm to represent the larger autumn of humanity. And as he says at the end, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? But he works himself into a kind of ecstasy where he is at one and united with the destructive and impersonal forces of autumn, this terrific storm shaking everything. But as he becomes one with that spirit, he takes joy in that ecstasy of destruction, because only through that means will this birth come about. So you can follow along with me. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-driven multitudes, O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed the winged seeds, where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion o'er the dreaming earth, and fill driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors plain and hill. Wild spirit, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, oh, hear. So he's calling out. And then the last couple of verses to the poem. He says, if I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear. If I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power, and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, O unconquerable. If even I were as in my boyhood and could be the comrade of thy wanderings o'er heaven, as then, when to outstrip thy skiey speed scarce seemed a vision, I would never have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. All right, so he's saying if he had the spirit of his boyhood, he would instantly respond, but instead he feels separate from the spirit and he's intoning it in prayer. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life. I bleed. A heavy weight of ours has chained and bowed one too like thee, tameless and swift and proud. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness. And then he raises in pitch. Be thou, spirit fierce, my spirit. Be thou me, impetuous one. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe, like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. So, yeah, that's the lofty view of the poet for Shelley, that he could serve as the instrument for this spirit, that his words, these fiery words, would move as from an unextinguished hearth, like sparks going among mankind, and that the trumpet of a prophecy, a new spring for humankind could be born. I always have mixed feelings about doing something like this because, of course, I've read these poems for years, and I know the language is difficult. Wordsworth has a poem, he wrote these autobiographical poems, one of them which is incomplete. I don't really know the whole history of it, but the Recluse. So it's the notion of the poet who goes away in retreat, but in that retreat, he begins to conceive a message for all of humankind. So in the paradox of in his solitude, he senses his oneness with the whole and the message of what is to come. And Wordsworth was a great visionary, a great idealist. And here's what he says. Imagine this is the Recluse. Yet in this peaceful vale, so in this valley where he's retreating, we will not spend unheard of days. Though loving peaceful thought, a voice shall speak. And what will be the theme? So the retreat is not oblivion of the world. A voice will speak, something will happen. And what will be the theme? On man, on nature, and on human life. Musing in solitude, I oft perceive fair trains of imagery arise before me, imagery before me rise, accompanied by feelings of delight, pure or with no unpleasing sadness mixed. And I'm conscious of affecting thoughts and dear remembrances, whose presences soothes or elevates the mind, intent to weigh the good and evil of our mortal state. To these emotions, whencesoever they come, whether from breath of outward circumstance or from the soul, an impulse to herself, I would give utterance in numerous verse. Of truth, of grandeur, beauty, love, and hope, and melancholy, fear subdued by faith, of blessed consolations in distress, of moral strength and intellectual power, of joy in widest commonality spread, of the individual mind that keeps her own in violent retirement, subject there to conscience only, and the law supreme of that intelligence which governs all, I sing, fit audience let me find, though few. And he says, descend again in the tradition of the great bard or of the prophet, invoking this vision and this power higher than him. Descend, prophetic spirit, that inspires the human soul of universal earth, dreaming on things to come, and dost possess a metropolitan temple in the hearts of mighty poets. Upon me bestow a gift of genuine insight. that my song, with starlike virtue in its place, may shine, shedding benignant influence, and secure itself from all malevolent effect of those mutations that extend their sway throughout the nether sphere. And if with this, here's Wordsworth talking about his tendency to autobiography, not just abstract, he wants, and if with this I mix more lowly matter, with the thing contemplated, describe the mind and man contemplating, and who and what he was, the transitory being that beheld this vision, when and where and how he lived, be not this labor useless, if such theme may sort with the highest objects, then dread power, whose gracious favor is the primal source of all illumination, may my life express the image of a better time, more wise desires, simpler manners, nurse my heart in genuine freedom, all pure thoughts be with me. So shall thy unfailing love guide, support, and cheer me to the end. Let's look then at a poem by Whitman. This is a poem by Walt Whitman, the American poet, and he also, you'll see, he's also right at the start, just like if you were reading the Iliad or the Odyssey, he's invoking the Muse to come and speak to him. And the song he wants to sing is the universal. He wants to invoke that which goes beyond nations, beyond races, beyond religions. He wants to invoke that and that future as well. Actually, it's the Muse that calls to him. This frequently happens too. The Muse needs a poet. So come, said the Muse, sing me a song no poet has yet chanted. Sing me the universal. And then he goes, in this broad earth of ours, amid the measureless grossness and the slag, enclosed and safe within its central heart nestles the seed perfection. So Whitman's view of the rebirth of humanity is it exists now within us. It's a seed that has to elevate it, and then it won't come from the outside. It's going to come from within. This seed perfection is just fine at its level. By every life, a share or more or less, none born but it, the seed, is born. Concealed or unconcealed, the seed is waiting. Lo, the soul, I skipped some parts, but here we go. Lo, the soul, above all science, for it has history gathered like husks around the globe. For it, the entire star myriads roll through the sky. For Whitman, the soul is it. The soul is you can't understand the universe if you don't understand, like the ancient Patanjali, the great yoga master, the universe exists for the evolution and the unfolding and the experience of the soul. So Whitman takes it. In spiral routes by shore, as a much tacking ship upon the sea, for it, the soul, the partial to the permanent flowing, for it, the real to the ideal tends, for it, the mystic evolution, not the right only justified, what we call evil also justified. Whitman was a great believer in overcoming duality. Forth from their masks, no matter what, a huge festering trunk, from craft and guile and tears, health to emerge, and joy universal. Out of the bulk, the morbid and the shallow, out of the bad majority, the countless varied frauds of men and states, electric, antiseptic yet, cleaving, suffusing all, only the good is universal. And then he has this image of the bird. So he goes from the seed here to the bird. Over the mountain growths, disease and sorrow, an uncaught bird is ever hovering, high in the purer, happier air. From imperfection's murkiest cloud darts always forth one ray of perfect light, one flash of heaven's glory. To fashions, customs discord, to the mad babble din, the deafening orgies, soothing each lull, a strain is heard, just heard, from some far shore, the final chorus sounding. Oh, the blessed eyes, the happy hearts that see, that know the guiding threads so fine along the mighty labyrinth. All for immortality, Love like light silently wrapping all. Nature's amelioration blessing all. The blossoms, fruits of orchards, fruits of ages, orchards divine and certain, forms, objects, growths, humanities, to spiritual images ripening. And he ends, give me, O God, to sing that thought. Give him or her I love, this quenchless faith in thy ensemble. Whatever else withhold not from us, belief in plan of thee enclosed in time and space, health, peace, salvation, universal. Is that enough?
It's amazing. Do you want to say a little more? Or toss it out.
There's one, let's look at one passage by Shelley, because it goes more, the kind of changes, what characterizes this rebirth is really drawn out so wonderfully. So, sorry, so let me stop share here and go to that. Shelley wrote a long lyric, Shelley wrote a long lyric poem called Prometheus Unbound. And it's a play, actually. It's a lyric play. It's supposedly a closet play, meaning it's not to be performed on stage, but I don't know. I always wonder if somebody could perform it on stage. But it's, so, the Greek myth of Prometheus, most of you know this. It's Zeus or Jupiter was the tyrant god, which was jealous of and envious of human beings, evolving past, so he wants to suppress the growth and enlightenment of humanity. And Prometheus becomes the savior of humanity by illuminating men's minds, bringing them the sciences, the arts, language, mathematics, everything they need to expand. And for this, Jupiter or Zeus, whichever name you want to give him, crucifies Prometheus, bounds him to the mountain, and there he is tortured, until his final release. So he's this suffering savior for the human race. And so there's a passage where Shelley's Prometheus, towards the end, Prometheus sends out a spirit to take the mystic shell of Proteus and blow it over all of mankind. And so he says, you'll see here, it says Prom, that's Prometheus. He speaks to this errand, it's like an errand spirit, elemental spirit that serves him. Go, born over the cities of mankind, whirlwind-footed coursers, once again outspeed the sun around the orbed world. And as thy chariot cleaves the kindling air, thou breathe into the many-folded shell, loosening its mighty music. It shall be a thunder mingled with clear echoes. So again, the blowing of the conch shell, it also represents the prophetic spirit, the power of sound. And then the spirit later comes back and says, as I have said, I floated to the earth. It was, as it still is, the pain of bliss to move, to breathe, to be. So in that atmosphere, the spirit is constricted by the way human beings have lived. It's a choking atmosphere, the selfishness and pollution and everything of human life. I, wandering, went among the haunts and dwellings of mankind, and first was disappointed, not to see such mighty change as I had felt within, expressed in outward things. And then the spirit takes a closer look and discovers it was wrong. And these are all the changes that have occurred, right? But soon I looked, and behold, thrones were kingless, and men walked one with the other, even as spirits do. None fawned, none trampled. Hate, disdain, or fear, self-love or self-contempt, on human brows no more inscribed, as o'er the gates of hell, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. So, right, this old despair, as human beings used to walk, as if on their foreheads was written, abandon all hope. This was gone now. None frowned, none trembled, none with eager fear gazed on another's eye of cold command. until the subject of a tyrant's will became worse fate, the abject of his own. Right? So we internalize a kind of self-hatred through the hatred and tyranny of others directed at us. And he didn't see this. This was gone now. Would worse fate, the abject of his own, which spurred him like an outspanned horse to death. None wrought his lips in truth entangling lines, which smiled the lie his tongue disdained to speak. None with firm sneer trod out in his own heart the sparks of love and hope, till there remained those bitter ashes, a soul consumed, and a wretch crept, a vampire among men, infecting all with this hideous ill. All these were gone. None talked that common, false, cold, hollow talk, which makes the heart deny the yes it breathes, yet question that unmeant hypocrisy with such a self-mistrust as has no name. And then he has very elevated things to say about the emancipation of women. Remember, Shelley was married to Mary Shelley. And women too, frank, beautiful, and kind, as free heaven which reigns fresh light and dew on the wide earth, past, gentle, radiant forms, from custom's evil taint, exempt and pure, speaking the wisdom once they could not think, looking emotions once they feared to feel, change to all which once they dared not be, yet being now made earth like heaven, nor pride, nor jealousy, nor envy, nor ill shame, the bitterest of those drops of treasured gall, spoilt the sweet taste of the nepenthe, love. He goes on, thrones, altars, judgment seats, and prisons, wherein and beside which by wretched men were born scepters, tiaras, swords, and chains, and tomes of reasoned wrong, glozed on by ignorance, were like those monstrous and barbaric shapes, the ghosts of a no more remembered fame, which from their unworn obelisks look forth in triumph o'er the palaces and tombs of those who were their conquered. So, right, humanity has gone beyond thrones, altars, judgment seats, and prisons. Conquerors, they stand not o'erthrown, but unregarded now. And those foul shapes abhorred by God and man, which under many a name and many a form, strange, savage, ghastly, dark, and execrable, were Jupiter, the tyrant of the world, and which the nations, panic-stricken, served with blood and hearts broken by long hope and love, dragged to his altars, soiled and gardenless, and slain among men's unreclaimed tears, flattering the thing they feared, which fear was hate, frown, moldering fast o'er their abandoned shrines. And then here he gets to the climax here. The painted veil by those who were called life, which mimicked, as with colors idly spread, all men believed and hoped, is torn aside. The loathsome mask has fallen. The man remains, scepterless, free, uncircumscribed, but man, equal, unclassed, tribeless, and nationless, exempt from awe, worship, degree, the king o'er himself, just, gentle, wise, but man, passionless. No, yet free from guilt or pain, which were, for his will made and suffered them, nor yet exempt, though ruling them like slaves, from chance and death and mutability. The clogs of that which else might o'ersoar, the loftiest star of unascended heaven, pinnacle dim in the intense inane.
Oh.
So all these things had held men back, and humanity has become the star that by recovering his divinity becomes the star that he was meant to be.
Oh.
I know it's very thick language and it's very graphic language, but maybe you get a sense of it. At least it could be enough to start a conversation.
And it's so beautiful. Diana, did you have a thought?
I actually was just, I was immersed in it. I wasn't thinking, I haven't thought of anything about it, except I was just immersed in your words and feeling them through me. So I really don't have a comment because I feel like I'm resting in that immersion. So thank you very much. That was beautiful.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the power of sound is so important to poetry. I mean, we've kind of, I think, tend to belittle poetry and imagine, well, it's, you know, it's the art of the right placed word. I mean, and that's true, but with somebody like Shelley, whose ideation and then the whole language of vowel and consonant, the way it's coming together, the rhythm of it, it's it harkens back to the very ancient traditions, you know, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the Iliad and the Odyssey, where you had generations trained. It was never written down, it was trained. They would memorize, you know, hours and hours and hours of very precise language. And the recitation was releasing something in you that was more than just the conception, more than the symbolic conception, but it was releasing something else. Yeah, it had a power to it. Yes, Cliff.
It's maybe a rambling question, but I was thinking at the end when you're reading Shelley, for some reason, I was drawn to the Buddha and thinking that he saw in humanity that we create our own suffering. And it seems that these poets see that, and they also see a way out. They're visionaries, or they, you know, like without vision, the people perish kind of thing. But they are able to see a world that we have the potential to move towards, and they're almost calling on that world into being. And there's this power, I think, in the poets, this willpower that's at work, that's maybe trying to ignite that collective will to just put away our nonsense and see the better world and live in it. I was thinking of that ancient saying that you can't build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. Its foundations must precipitate like crystals from the solution of life. Is that what the poets are doing? Is somehow helping us pull into manifestation which is already there potentially, but for some reason we like to put our heads in the sand or in the gutter?
Yeah, I mean, my own opinion is, from a larger standpoint, the poets are as necessary to the regeneration as, you know, as last year's plants are supplying the seed. So we need those elevated souls to appear and to call out of us what is latent and asleep. It's a completely natural process, and it shows the essential function that the poet serves. It's not just, you know, some gratuitous art that, you know, makes us feel good or entertains us. It's absolutely necessary. The new world has to be summoned by the poet, and by poet I mean in the larger sense, not just people found in Norton Anthology, but all of those elevated souls that use the power of sound in one way or another, or even somebody like Ramana Maharshi, who didn't use sound, but was using sound at another level. You know, if you went and sat with him in silence, something was, you know, shaken up and awakened in you.
I feel as if that is the role that, not recalling her last name, but Amanda, the young woman who spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration, played. And her language was one that we really haven't heard before as a people. I mean, it was so newly crafted that even in the way she pulled together words and phrases, and her cadence was something new that stirred us in ways that perhaps we had never been stirred before.
No. Is it Gorman? Is it Amanda Gorman?
Gorman,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you.
No. Yeah, beautiful. And it also shows how the use of language evolves. Language is a living thing. You know, every dictionary tells a lie by being a dictionary, by making it sound like there's something called language that is frozen and can be cauterized, and because language is a flowing, moving thing. And she was using new forms that have come through, you know, echoes of the hip hop culture and all of that.
And was Whitman, for example, not doing something like that himself?
Yes. Yes, very much so. He's often looked at as sort of the father of free verse. He was, emancipating poetry from, it had become, very, very stylized and frozen in, and overly concerns with rhythm and end rhymes and all of that. And there now some people say, oh, well, there's no structure to Whitman or most of his poems, but it isn't true. Actually, there's a lot of internal rhyming and a lot of unusual rhyming. He's sort of the announcer of the jazz age in a way, and what was then going to happen with improvisation and the looseness of improvisation in jazz, which was a revolution and reform of poetry in another way. It was, in a sense, anticipated by what Whitman did to language.
Bob, I saw your hand.
Well, I'm so excited about what you just did, but I think the reference to Amanda Gorman, what struck me as I was hearing these poems is that they were kind of evoking to me a kind of philosophical way of thinking, in whether it was Spinoza or Kierkegaard or Confucius. It was this kind of inspiration to take that step that would sort of knock away the old and substitute a new way, which is what the philosophers were kind of, stressing. Like in Spinoza, you could see through your human eyes, subspecie humanitatis, but to see through your divine self, subspecie eternitatis, is a whole nother way of being. It's a rationalism, but you've got to be inspired to do that. Or you've got to, as Kierkegaard said, get hit on the head before you break out of your habitual way of thinking. That's kind of what Confucius was doing too. It's you need that poetry to strike you to the core that it's time to move. And I was struck by the last comment with when you read the first Shelley about autumn. Up at my Zendo, in the back of the yard, we have a Bodhi tree, and the Bodhi tree just recently, a couple weeks ago, lost all of its leaves. So autumn. And 2 weeks later, it's now in full bloom with bright green leaves. Spring. So we have autumn and spring, but they're almost right on top of each other. And winter was the blink of an eye. But
it was not far behind.
It was dead to the world, and now 2 weeks later, it's in full, beautiful green spring bloom.
Bob, I love that. I love your comments and bringing in Spinoza and Kierkegaard, and also pointing out that there has to be kind of a death blow to the false in order that the new can be released. And and I think about Socrates, and that he had this, what he took to be a religious duty of to go around and try to find wise people, and in questioning whoever they were, inevitably they would be their limitations or hypocrisy or falsehood would be shown up, and he hurt enough feelings eventually where it all came back at him and ended up being his execution. But as as somebody who insisted on self-examination, he was pointing out we have to either through cooperating with the life process or through our own self-questioning, we have to recognize and dismantle the false if the new is to find birth. Kurt.
To the oracle, and the oracle, Delphic oracle, said, "You are the wisest man in Athens."
Yeah.
And he was so puzzled by that. He went talking around. Finally, he realized that all the people who said they knew something, he could poke holes in it. So he said, "Well, I at least know that I don't know anything. So I'm wiser than all the other people who are speaking as though they know something."
Right. Exactly. Yeah. He said, at least I appear to have a human sort of wisdom. Kirk.
Yes, Joe, thank you for reading those poems in such a fine way. That, as you said, it was the vocalization brought out aspects of the poem that just reading on the page, one doesn't usually pick up, right? So the way that you emphasized and articulated it really helped the understanding. But I was struck, and maybe you've already answered this question, but the first two in particular, these the poets are calling to something, which you called the muse, or Wordsworth called it the muse. And it's, it's also this idea of the seed, the bird, the divinity within. Is how would you, in general, define what the muse is?
Well, I think you touch on a really important point, and that's that there's a mystery about human agency in all the arts, truly, and the poet isn't on the true poet isn't on his own or on her own, and so in invoking the muse, they are asking for that inspiration which will carry them. So that they become the mouthpiece for, I don't know, what is it? The spirit of the age, the spirit of truth, the voice for the, it is some higher spiritual essence that they want access to, but they cannot control this. Wordsworth likes to use the word grace. The gracious influence. That is, it is something that, as the Upanishad said, the Atman chooses whom it will. So the poet has the experience of being elevated, of being chosen, of being carried for a time. It's not constant. It's in particular moods for limited times, of visitations, as Wordsworth calls it elsewhere. And it's in those visitations that then what is truly valuable can come out, because it's not of the person alone. It's, I guess, to sort of in a comparative way, to quote Paul, St. Paul said, "Not I, but Christ in me." In some sense, the poets are saying, not I, but the muse in me. What that is precisely, I think it's open to everyone's, spiritual intuitions. It probably cannot ultimately be defined. A theologically inclined person would say it's God. A theosophist might say it's the buddhi, the Atma Buddhi, that elevated aspect of the spiritual nature we share in, but it's normally off limits to us. We don't, but conditions can sometimes become favorable, and then its influence is felt, and one could become a vehicle of it.
I thought what you were going to, that's a wonderful answer. Thank you. I thought what you were going to say as you started to explain it was that there's also this filtering that makes the voice of the muse particularly relevant to the current moment. Yeah. It could be the spirit of this age, the spirit of this time, right? So this prophetic spirit, we want you to speak in words that's going to have the maximum good given the level, the karma of the field. Yes. Something like that, right?
That's a very, very good point. And the incredible passion that these poets had towards their work, it's where it's almost like life and death, the pour themselves into it. It's speaking the right word for the right moment at the right time, and they know it at some level. They know what they have to say needs to be heard, that it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the age. And that's a mystery in itself. Why is what is really needed for a culture is present inside a person, like, and they're giving birth to it. It reminds me of in Plato's Symposium, where he speaks about the true Platonic relationship. I mean, we talk about Platonic, like everything else, we view things from the outside entirely. So we say Platonic relationship is a relationship without sexual relationship. But the Platonic relationship was a erotic relationship of minds, and he speaks about when when the teacher is near a receptive disciple, it is like a form of pregnancy or like a form of stimulation where he feels he cannot be repressed. He must pour forth what is within him to the receptive pupil. And I think the poets feel something like that too.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Do you feel as if, Joe, the perhaps the role that the poet plays is in making themselves ready and available to receive? And a lot of this has to do with their training, with their practice, and also with their openness, and also knowing how to filter. I mean, they are in some part doing that filtering process themselves. Just, I mean, sometimes they are, and sometimes it's just pure flow. But even when it is pure flow, what is allowed to come through to begin with has been shaped by the way that they've lived their lives, by the way that they've used their minds, by the way that they have used their hearts, but what they're open to. Yeah,
it's a good suggestion. It's very logical. And whether, it would be whether in particular biographies you would see this preparation process, or do some of them prepare, in some sense in another life or something, it's, I think for some of them, the talent is there at the earliest indication. And it's hard to see it as the result of preparation. But I think by analogy, we shouldn't just say, oh, well, there's these classes of poets that, have this extraordinary gift, and we have to look to them for transmissions from the divine, and only they can speak the right word at the right moment. I think the lesson is that we have to fulfill that function as well to some degree. I mean, oh gosh, could I get a passage? Hold on a second, I'm gonna grab a book. No, but in this room, Whitman says this, it addresses this exactly, but I think it's well worth seeing. And
Joe, even if they come, enormously gifted with genius,
yes,
still it requires being within a certain context. I mean, someone who, is gifted musically, they are generally, they have access to an instrument and to hearing music, and often very good music. And the same, I would imagine, with these poets. They are not unlettered.
No, that's true.
About song, there's kind of an interesting element of all of these words, kind of begin to resonate with us. And as we empty out, we start resonating with them. So I think maybe that's a little bit what Renee's talking about, is that suddenly it's not just inspiration mentally, it's just resonating in a almost physical way of singing along with the song. Socrates was always listening for his daimon, but he always went into a trance first, so he would not only be prepared, but open to that kind of resonance.
So here's what he says in his 1855 preface to his first edition of Leaves of Grass, which he published anonymously, by the way, which is interesting in itself. We think of Whitman as a great self-promoter, but the first edition was published anonymously. He said, "The messages of the great poets to each man and women are, come to us on equal terms. Only then can you understand us. We are no better than you. What we enclose, you enclose. What we enjoy, you may enjoy. Did you suppose there could be only one supreme? We affirm that there can be unnumbered supremes, and that one does not countervail another any more than one eyesight countervails another, and that men can be good or grand only of the consciousness of their supremacy within them."
What was that last line? Men can be only good and great.
Good. Oh, do you want to see it? I guess I could share it.
I just didn't quite catch the last phrases there.
The messages of the great poets to each man and woman are, come to us on equal terms. Only then can you understand us. We are no better than you. What we enclose, you enclose. What we enjoy, you may enjoy. Did you suppose there could be only one supreme? We affirm there can be unnumbered supremes, and that one does not countervail another any more than one eyesight countervails another, and that men can be good or grand only of the consciousness of their supremacy within them.
Wow. That's really beautiful. Did he write that in prose that way, that was appearing on the page?
Yeah, so that's this great document it's called the Preface to the 1855 edition, and it was obviously the result of an extraordinary ecstasy. The whole thing is just I think it goes on for 26 pages. There's no punctuation, there's just ellipses everywhere, and I don't know that it ever was recorded what the story of it was, but it became something that he mined for the rest of his life for new poems. So it was obviously some kind of incredible revelation in a way, and it has all that energy. And so that's really the first book of poems he published. That's the document that precedes all the poems, is that preface.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. You're right, it was worth the wait.
Okay, well, let me read you one other passage from that section. It's short, but it's a classic. And he's hinting at why he's going free verse, right? What's that about? He said, who troubles himself about ornaments or fluency is lost. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and the sun and the animals, despise riches, give alms to everyone that asks, stand up for the stupid and crazy, devote your income and labor to others, hate tyrants, argue not concerning God, have patience and indulgence toward the people, take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or any number of men, go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all that you've been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul. This is the preparation, Renee, right? And then what? And your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lash. So that's the true poem for Whitman, is that you become the poem. It's not something that can be printed in a book.
And then we will be reborn. We will we birth ourselves. So there's something about the poet able to serve as a midwife, I guess, to us in birthing ourselves.
Yes. Going back to Bob's comments about Socrates, right? Socrates saw his role as a midwife. He was given. Oh.
Well, that was simply marvelous, Joe. Just so
for me.
Satisfying. Is there anyone who'd like to give Joe a little vote of thanks for his presentation today?
Joe, it was amazing. I had to get out and physically do things. It was trimming plants and whatnot, so that I could actually just take it all in rather than kind of thinking it through the way Diane mentioned. And it took a while for it to filter. It's almost like when I travel to Mexico, it takes a while before I start to pick up when I hear poetry, which I don't read often, almost never, but it takes a while for it to filter, similar to the idea that what these poets, in bringing us the ideas from the Muse, it takes a while for the race, for humanity to be able to grok what's being brought down. And it's almost like the race needs to evolve to a certain point, whether it's through the prefrontal cortex developing or however that is working, it just takes time. You did such a brilliant job, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, David. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yes.
I'm gonna jump in here really quick. My video isn't working. I think I'm having just a bad connection, Renee. It's Carol.
Great to
I
have you.
was so moved by that last passage, but I didn't catch who it was by.
Hi, Carol. That was again from Whitman's preface to his 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass. And I'll be happy to cut and paste both of those passages and give them to Renee, and then she can get them.
That would be great. And then if you wouldn't mind passing them on to me, Renee, I would really appreciate that.
Yes, I imagine our front desk can mail them out to all of the participants today, which would be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you again for such a beautiful presentation.
Thank you, Carol. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, Joe. It was great.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Mahalo.